Hello there. My name is Alicia, aka Edmiston Creations, and I am a wife, mom, social worker, and athlete living in the mountains of South Central New Mexico. And this is a space where I like to share a bit about what I've been knitting, what I've been sewing, sometimes the things that I've been up to with my family, and I also like to weave in some general mental health and wellness practices that can be applied to making. So if any of that sounds like your cup of tea, then this is the space for you. So first off, I wanted to say I hope that everyone has had a restful, week, and if you did celebrate Christmas, I hope you had a wonderful time. And if it was a difficult holiday for you, I hope that you found some comfort amidst the, pain or grief that you're experiencing. Um, for me and my family, we had a very restful and easeful holiday. We kind of shut down communication pretty much with anybody outside of the house, it, except for maybe text messages. And we spent the couple days together and lots of Christmas movies, lots of laughter, some walks outside. My son was sick, or getting over being sick, so we didn't get outside as much as we typically would have, but we did get outside some, and so that was nice. Lots of good food, and yeah, just lots of great memories. So I have to say that my most favorite part of Christmas was my daughter snuggling up. She's 5 now. My daughter snuggled up next to me at the end of Christmas Day. She woke up at 4 a.m. By the way, she was so excited that Santa came, and I was exactly the same way whenever I was her age. So I was always up super early for Santa. So that was really cute for me, to see her up and so excited that early. But at the end of the day, when she finally was crashing, she cuddled up next to me on the couch and asked me to sing her to sleep. And that was definitely the highlight of my Christmas, hands down. So it was just little moments like that that we've had peppered in across the whole week since Christmas, and it's been lovely. So anyway, today, what I have for you is a little bit of show and tell, and then as promised from last episode, I wanted to share today with you my making intentions for 2024. So without further ado, let's dive into the show and tell. So I did finish my socks the bear paw socks for both of my kids. So Ella has been wearing hers pretty frequently, and here are Howie's. I made his in bear paw sock held double for the bear paw sock pattern, and this colorway is Everything's Copacetic. And so I got both of theirs finished, and they have not sat still for me to get a picture of them with them on, but they're done. And I am chugging along on my husband's pair. I should have his finished by his birthday in mid-January. So that gives me a little bit more time to kind of spread out the bear paw sock love. And so he's really excited to have his to wear too. So there's that. I ended up casting on the socks and had them going. So these are now, I finished these the day after Christmas. They are now lovingly my Christmas socks for 2023, and I have all sorts of wonderful memories and emotions wrapped up in these socks, and I love them. And in fact, I loved them so much. These are from the Farmer's Daughter Fiber Pom Pom magazine that recently came out this past fall. I loved these so much that I casted on the Starflight socks. And so this is my progress so far on the Starflight socks. I'm using Everything's Copacetic Bear Paw sock that I used for my son's pair of socks, and some Stash sock squad yarn in this beautiful, like, rusty, it kind of reminds me of Mad Mardigan actually, but it's not quite brown enough. It's more of a rust, I guess. But that's what it reminds me of. And so anyway, this is my Starflight sock. I am knitting these as part of the Farmer's Daughter Fiber Pom Pom magazine knit along that I'm hosting. So, you know, if you are interested in joining in, then just either comment or send me a direct message on Instagram. That's probably the better way to get a hold of me, is to direct message me on Instagram, and all of my contact information will be in the show notes. But this knit along is going on through the end of February, and you can knit any pattern you want from the magazine, any yarn you want. You know, there's really not any rules as long as, you know, you just are knitting from the magazine. So I really love this sock pattern, and I like I don't know if you can tell on here, but it's got a quilted stitch pattern on the top of the sock, and then on the back of this, you know, on the back of the sock, you've got your heel flap here, and it'll be plain stockinette for under the arch of your foot. But I really like this little quilted stitch detail. If you can see it here, I think it's so cute. And the color work was a lot of fun for these. Sock knitting has just brought me so much joy that it is something that I plan to carry on in 2024. So I still have my Viadava memory socks going on. So my loose plan is that I want to finish my Starflight socks, and then I will finish my Viadava socks and cast on my pressed flowers socks for the I Can Buy Myself Flowers knit along that Young Folk Knits and Designs by So and So are hosting. So I'm really excited to have all of these socks come to life and be able to wear them as part of my wardrobe. I've been living in my tessellated socks and my socks since I finished them. So yeah, it's really been fun. So now that's kind of all the show and tell that I have for you today. I do have other things that I've been knitting and sewing, but I will share those another time. Today I wanted to get into sharing my making intentions for 2024. And the reason why, you know, as the year comes to a close and a new year starts, I really love beginnings, you know, just the idea of a new year, new me, but that's not really, you know, I mean, it's a wonderful, uplifting kind of energy, but I mean, I'm still me, constantly evolving. So I really could pick any time to be a new me, I guess, you know, not necessarily the new year. But on that note, I have always loved New Year's resolutions, but years ago, I shifted to making intentions instead of resolutions, because resolutions are connected to goals, and goals are a form of rigidity psychologically. So it's a rule to follow. So when I create a goal, it's a destination or a point to get to, and then, you know, achieve it. And achieving a goal is very satisfying. But also on the flip side, if I don't meet my goal or if I get off track, then I can feel devastated or beat myself up, or self-sabotaging behaviors can come into play. And so, goals can also fall by the wayside. And so I really like intentions because intentions are connected to and help promote psychological flexibility, which means that we can build in ways to constantly strive and move towards these intentions. They're actionable statements. But if I get off track, all I need to do is remind myself, hey, this is my approach and this is my way of being, and get back on to what my original path of intention is. So I really like intentions for that reason. Now, that said, I do think goals have a place because they do give you something to shoot for. And there's nothing wrong for shooting for the stars if that's what you want. So I don't want to, I think that it's common practice in the human condition to, with the judging mind, to say, oh, okay, well, you're doing intentions, so that means intentions are better than goals. And no, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that each one of them have their place. And I actually do have some goals that are woven into my intentions, and you'll see what I'm talking about once I get into sharing. But, goals have their place as long as they're rooted in your values and you have that sense of direction, and you can come back and reorient yourself to your original path of intention. So, all of that said, before I get into sharing my making intentions, I want to say that these are a study of one, of Alicia. And so my intention in sharing these with you is that I hope that you feel empowered to maybe take them and turn them into something that's workable for you. Maybe you copy some of them because they very much resonate and relate to where you're at and your making venture and journey, or take these with a grain of salt and just kind of let them go in one ear and out the other and say, hey, cool, that's what she's doing. That doesn't mean that that's what I need to do. These intentions are a summation of my experience with making and where I'm at in my making journey. So, study of one here. My coach, Sunny Dyer, would always remind me of that whenever I was training as an athlete. Like, Alicia, it's a study of one to find that right recipe for training and fueling and sleep and all of that to dial in for optimal performance. And so, that's constantly what I did as an athlete, and here I am. That's what I'm doing as a maker. So, without further ado, here are my making intentions for 2024. So my first one is to knit or sew what sparks joy. That means that, there's tons of designs out there that I love and they're beautiful, but maybe they don't meet what I need right now for my making at the time. Like, maybe I need, if I'm in a stressful period of my life, maybe I need a more mindless make or knit. Maybe if I'm in an easeful period, I need a knit that's more engaging, and I need to look at the pattern more. And same with sewing, vice versa here. So, I want to give myself permission if I start a project and initially it sparks joy. If that changes, I'm giving myself permission to set that aside and or frog it when the time comes. Like, it's okay. Sometimes whenever I start something, I'm really excited about it, and then it just kind of either I lose interest or I've moved on to something else that's sparking joy in the moment. I want to give space for that. And like I said, I can choose to leave that project hibernating and pick it back up when it does spark joy again. Or if I'm noticing that that joy is just not coming back, I'm going to give myself permission to frog that project. But knitting or sewing what sparks joy really aligns with my value of making intentionally and making items that I treasure and will love for years to come. So that's my first intention. My second intention is to always have a pair of socks casted on. Tying into my first one, knitting socks right now is sparking joy for me, so I am going with it, man. I am really thrilled to have, I've never knit socks before, and this past Thanksgiving when I started the tessellated socks, and I just love them so much that, yeah, I mean, here I am. I'm gonna be crazy sock lady, and I'm here for it. It's fine. I actually decided, because I have been enjoying sock knitting so much, that I signed up for the Farmer's Daughter Fibers 2024 Sock Squad. So I'm super stoked about that, and I will be using every month's yarn that comes for a pair of socks. I did Sock Squad in 2022. Didn't use any of it for socks, but I loved the yarn and I still have it. I've actually got some that has gone into shawls and some other projects. So I have used the yarn for different things, not socks. So that'll change. I will be, using yarn from Sock Squad 2024, but also yarn that I had from 2022 and that I currently have in stash that will work for socks. So, but I like this intention because, I mean, I will always have a pair of socks casted on. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm focused on constantly cranking out socks. It just means that I will always have some going on the needles. So when that joy is sparking, I can just pick up my socks and keep knitting on them. And so one thing I have noticed whenever I've knitted socks is as soon as I finish the first one, if I cast on that second sock and get it going at least a few rounds of the ribbing, that keeps me going to finish my second sock. I don't get second sock syndrome that way. So that's another reason for the intention, is to just keep going as soon as I cast off one, to go ahead and start that second one. So that's my second intention. The third intention that I have is one that I actually kind of started, I think maybe in the fall of this past year, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm gonna keep using it in 2024 as a guiding light, is to knit from stash. And this applies to fabric too, for sewing projects, but it mainly applies to yarn, because when I started sewing, I started that entire process in a very intentional, mindful way. So I don't really have a huge fabric stash. I tend to buy and make what I buy. Does that make sense? I tend to buy and then sew from what I buy. Pretty, like it's kind of a, I don't know, like I don't accrue fabric in the same way, and I intentionally buy fabric I have intentionally bought fabric from the start of my sewing journey, so I don't have a whole pile of fabric just laying around. And that was actually one of the tips from Sew Liberated when I took their intro to sewing course, was to don't go out and buy all the fabric and accrue a stash. Buy for your projects, and as you go, you will end up accumulating a fabric stash naturally. And I was like, oh wow, man, if I had been told that when I started crocheting and knitting, like what a different world I would be in right now. But honestly, I have no regrets for my journey with accruing yarn over the years, because, you know, really kind of just buying yarn, and because buying yarn is a hobby all into itself, let's be honest. Buying yarn really allowed me to experiment with what colors I like, what bases I like, what yarn weights I like. And so now I've really gotten to know the types of yarn, the types of wool that I like. And so it's not that it was a bad thing, I guess, that I have a whole lot of yarn now. I have a great stash. It's a lot more curated now to my taste, because of my intention to knit from stash and buy intentionally. So some things that I have done to help me knit from stash. I wanted to share this with you if you do have, this goal or intention for the new year to knit more from your stash. Two things that I have done is to knit more from stash does not mean that I will never buy yarn again, because until I knit down my stash to some point. That goal does not work for me. It also does not work for me to set a budget of how much I will spend on yarn monthly, because inevitably I end up going over whatever I budget for. And so what really has helped me is to say, okay, I will only buy yarn or fabric that I plan on sewing or knitting immediately when it arrives in the mail. Now, remember, I live in a remote area, so I don't really have the option to go shopping locally. So I do mail order items. But what has really helped me a lot is to say, okay, I can pick out the yarn or color or whatever I have for X project, but I will not buy that yarn until I am actually ready to cast it on. And that helps a lot, believe it or not. So I have been able to be much more intentional with my purchases, because I'm like, hey, I really don't have plans to cast on this sweater or this shawl until I get this project off my needles. And so it helps to motivate me in a way to, get through some projects. I also reserve the right to have the power to veto. If I do want to cast on that project immediately and set aside whatever I'm working on, then that's okay. Because when I buy the yarn, I do plan on casting on within a week or so of the yarn arriving to my house or fabric. So that has really helped, as well as if I go to a fiber or yarn event, and I am shopping in person, I waive the right, here to, I can buy something from that event because I am at a yarn event, and that's not something that I get to do every single day. And I also like having an intentional purchase from that event or that shop that's a memory from that trip. So I am okay with those purchases as well. The other thing that I've done, or things that I have done that helps with knitting more from stash, is to shift my relationship with my stash. So instead of thinking like, oh, my stash is limiting, I don't have the colors that I want for this project, I look at it as a challenge to find the right combo or the right yarn pairing to make a project. And shifting my mindset to making it a challenge to knit with what I have makes it really fun for me because I'm a competitive athlete by nature. And so it just taps into that character trait I have. So that really works well for me. So that's something that I've done, as well as challenging blocking beliefs that are present with stash. So I have had the blocking belief of, well, I don't want to break up a sweater quantity. Like if I have 3 or 4 skeins of one color, well, I can't use that for a cowl then, because then it would break up my sweater quantity. Yeah, no, that's not a thing. If I have it in stash, it's fair game. And if I want to use that color for a cowl, then I should use that color for a cowl. And then whatever I have left over, I can either gift to somebody, or I can make a hat from it, or I can buy 2 more skeins for a sweater when I actually ever get to that point. I don't need to buy those 2 skeins to replace them right then. It, just I can wait until that actually happens. And a lot of times that sweater that I had in my head to cast on just never jumps on my needles. So it, to me, I have learned what works again for me is that if I have a cowl that I want to make, or a shawl that I want to make, and I have these colors that are jumping out at me that are in my stash, just because I had a different project in mind whenever I bought the yarn, it doesn't mean that I need to stick with that original plan. So all of this kind of goes hand in hand, like with the blocking beliefs. Like if I bought yarn for a specific project, or whatever my original intention was with the yarn, I can let go of that and just, it's fair game if it's in my stash and I want to use it. And I can always, if I had that original project in mind, when I get to casting on that original project, whenever that is, I can always buy more yarn of that color, or it frees me up and liberates me to choosing a whole new color or a whole new yarn base that maybe I hadn't thought of yet. So that helps me to break out of the mindset of holding on to stash yarn. The other things that I think are fun ways to kind of, go about approaching your stash is, instead of buying yarn, maybe if you have some fiber friends, asking them to do a yarn swap with you. I've done this a few times with fiber friends, and it's a lot of fun. And it's a great way to, if your friend has a certain yarn base that they need and you have the perfect base and color for their project, you can swap with them and they can swap with you something that, in return that you can use for a project. And then you have like the memory and the connection of your relationship with your friend with that yarn. And that's really nice and lovely, to do. So, and it also, it decreases consumption too, which is great. So yeah. And you can also, the other thing that I've done with stash is yarn that no longer sparks joy or is not my vibe anymore. Because like I said, when I started purchasing yarn, I just went hog wild, as they say in the South. And I just bought all the beautiful colors, all the beautiful, whatever, just whatever. I went for all of it. And I have actually sold yarn and on secondhand, and then used that money to roll over into new projects that do spark joy. So either new yarn that is more in line with the type of yarn I like to use now, or I have bought fabric for sewing projects with the yarn that I have sold. So those are all things that help me to maintain this intention of knitting from stash, or maybe the better way to say it is to use what I have, use what materials I have, whether it's yarn or fabric. My fourth intention is to keep test knitting to one at a time. And I actually started doing this as well this past fall. I did have some overlap with my test knits, so there were times where I did have technically, you know, 2 going at a time, and I noticed whenever I had 2 or maybe more than 2 overlap, I started feeling more stressed. So I'm gonna keep this one going in 2024, 1 test knit at a time, and I'm good. I'm even going to try to do my best to, you know, to not pick up test knits that overlap, and maybe even give myself space to have no test knitting going for parts of the year. We'll see how that goes. I've really enjoyed the period of no test knits that I had through the month of December, and so you know, because I've enjoyed that, I do want to make sure that I, you know, follow that intention to 1 test knit at a time. I'm very serious about the commitment I make whenever I agree to a test knit. I've never been late for a deadline on a test knit, and I don't plan on being late ever. I know life happens and sometimes you can't control it and you are late, but I can control what I say yes to. And so I plan on being very intentional about applying for test knits and pausing and making sure this is an item that I really, really want in my wardrobe, instead of I'm just getting swept up in the application process and it's a fun, new, beautiful design. That pause for even just a few hours really helps me to reflect and connect with what works for me. And so I plan on continuing to do that into 2024, as well as I would like to maybe test knit some socks this year. So we'll see if that happens. I think you could see a theme that I'm really liking sock knitting. My last making intention is having boundaries with my making. So this is kind of a 2-parter. I think it's important for me with my personality. I'm very type A. I'm a very driven person. And so it's important for me to hold a boundary to make space for other things in my life and to hold that space as sacred. That means to give myself permission to nurture family relationships, working out, reading, my work as a social worker. And I mean, I nurture those things already in my life, but I want to give myself permission to, you know, if that means that I have less making time, that is okay. And that I can let go of feeling this obsessive need to, I have to constantly be producing. And that is totally self-imposed. That's all on me. And so I am going to work on being intentional with that approach and that practice to hold space for having other interests in my life. And it's okay for me to not constantly make if I so choose. So there you go. That's boundary number 1. My second boundary is to, you know, I've noticed something that works really well for me is to set general limits, or I think that's kind of the best way to say it, is like to set a limit with my making. So, or to have goals in a sense. So this is where goals kind of come in. I think, you know, number 1, my limit with or goal with making is any test knits that I commit to, I meet the deadline. So that's a goal. Hands down, if I agree to do a test knit. The other goal or limit that I would like to have is to make 1 pair of socks a month. The reason why this is a good limit for me is, if you haven't noticed, like I finished I finished the one pair of socks and I'm automatically casting on the next. And that is something I want to do, is to automatically go ahead and cast on. But I want to give myself that space to relax and not feel like I have to keep obsessively cranking out socks. So telling myself, hey, you know, if I've made one pair of socks this month, I've hit my goal. I can take a break from socks, or, you know, it's okay. I can knit them when and if I want or whatever, and I can shift my attention to some sweaters or shawls that I want to make. And it's okay to, it helps me to pace myself, I guess, having these kinds of goals. So if you're an overachiever, this may be for you. So on that note, my last limit or goal for my boundaries with making is to knit one shawl per quarter. So I am doing this with Chelsea Knits, Sews, Throws. That's her handle on Instagram. She had this phenomenal idea. I don't know, she must have just been in my head or something, but I have one since last fall. I have wanted more shawls in my wardrobe, and Chelsea came in clutch with this idea. She just happened to post on Instagram like, hey, I want to knit a shawl per quarter in 2024. Who wants to join? And I am like, hey, sign me up, because one shawl per quarter is a great, like, kind of chill approach. I would, you know, if it was me, I'd be like, I'm gonna knit a shawl a month or a shawl every 2 weeks. And no, that's not good for me. So I really liked the kind of the timing, like it's a good benchmark. But if I don't end up knitting a shawl per quarter, I am okay with that. It gives me something to shoot for, and it does align with what I intentionally and mindfully wanted to make for myself this year. So I will link to her post in Instagram about the, you know, shawl per quarter idea. You're welcome to join in. I would love for you to join us. And the hashtag is Shawl Crawl 2024. So I will also put that in the show notes, so you can check that out, and, you know, please join us if you would like. So those are all of my making intentions for 2024. As I wrap up here, I mean, just briefly, here are some tips for creating your own making intentions, or if you want to set intentions for other areas of your life, you can use these tips for that. So number one, I think that the most important thing is to remember your values. Whenever I was going about my making intentions for 2024, I thought about, well, what is really important to me and what really matters to me as I make things, knitting or sewing, in the coming year. And that, let your values lead you, because what's important to me may not be important to you. So keep that in mind. Then the second thing I would say is to really think about what would help you maintain that intention. So when I do this, I think about things that support me meeting the intention or following the intention, but I also think about the barriers to meeting the intention. And I shared, you know, some of that in my Knitting from Stash, because I hit a lot of barriers over the past year trying to knit more from my stash, and, you know, challenging those blocking beliefs, shifting my relationship with my stash, giving myself permission to swap yarn, donate yarn, sell yarn. All of these things helped me change my relationship with my stash and follow the intention. And now I buy yarn only when I plan on casting on a project. So, and that's actually worked. So if you really take the time to think about the supports and the barriers to meeting the intention, that will help you to stay on track. Whenever you make intentions, I recommend using active language, like starting your sentences, I am ... instead of I will try or I will do my best. You want to write your intentions as if they are actively happening in the present moment and that you are capable of doing them. That creates this process in your mind that thinks, hey, yeah, I do this naturally, of course. So using active language. And the last tip is to remove any distancing words from your intentions. So, for example, instead of I will do my best to keep test knitting to one at a time, I could remove all of those distancing words and say I keep test knitting commitments to one at a time. And so that again makes the intention more powerful. It's active. It's as if I already do it. And that is something that kind of helps your mind to cultivate that intention and manifest it in real life. So I keep test knitting commitments to one at a time. And I will say, just a quick note on the use of the word will, like I will knit from stash. Will is still considered a distancing word because it's a futuristic word. So it alludes that in the future I will knit from my stash. So instead of I will knit from stash, I knit from stash. That's the intention. So again, just trying to make it as active and present as possible. So that is it. Once again, this has been much longer than I thought it would be. But if you're still here at the end of the episode, I really thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for spending the last 40-ish minutes with me. And I really appreciate your viewership if you've watched any of my other episodes as well. I do plan on continuing to do this knitting podcast into the new year, and I do have an intention to keep it up. Probably bi-weekly is going to be my goal, the thing that I'm going to aim for, but I am going to give myself space that if life gets in the way, that may not happen. I like to get weekly episodes out, but sometimes that's not possible being a mom and also having my therapy private practice. There are some weeks that are just busier than others. So I think bi-weekly is a little bit more realistic for me, but again, #life. I mean, I can't foresee the future. We'll see. But what I can promise and commit to you is that I will be sharing more into the new year here on YouTube. And I so appreciate you joining me and being a part of this small little community of mindful makers. So I really do appreciate if you do take the time to comment and share. Do you have making intentions for 2024, or do you have goals? I would love to hear your goals too. Again, remember, goals have their place. And so please share with those in the comments, and I would love to read them and respond. And let's see, I think that's it. All of my best to you as the end of the year comes to a close here, and happy mindful making.